First and foremost, allow me to introduce members of the Standing Committee and the leadership that is here present. I think from the immediate right to your right is the National Organizing Secretary, Benevolence Taisekwa, and then we've got the Secretary for Local Government and the Deputy Mayor of Harare, Honorable Nkunguma, and we have got the Deputy Secretary General, Dr. Msebenzi. And without further ado, President of the MDC, please.
Thank you very much, Presidential Spokesman, Honorable Damba. Just to introduce another person, we have our youth chairperson, Albert Chidagwa. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this press conference. I want to thank you for having heeded to our call at very short notice. We want to promise you that we will give you longer notices next time. As you know, the Constitutional Court declined to hear our case on its merits. Having talked for about an hour or so in the court regarding whether or not the MDC and myself as president had locus standing, the Constitutional Court declined to hear our case on two grounds only. On one ground only, actually. And the ground was that we either had to apply for declaration of the delimitation report as invalid, or we had to apply that our rights to free and fair elections were infringed. We could not, said the Constitutional Court, we could not apply on both. In other words, they said we can't say, as we had argued, that the illegality, the irregularities on the delimitation report affected our rights to free and fair election. In our view, the Constitutional Court was avoiding hearing the matter on the merits. But what the Constitutional Court did, opened an avenue for us, and the avenue for us is to file the application before the High Court. We have prepared our papers, and today we are filing our application before the High Court, seeking exactly the same relief. And I want to reiterate the relief here for the sake of completeness. We argue that a declaration must be made that the delimitation report is invalid. And that number two, ZEC must be ordered to redo. And that number three, that the proclamation by the president must follow his receipt of a correct delimitation report. The issues that we raised in the Constitutional Court are exactly the same issues that we are going to raise in the High Court. And they are four. The first one is that there was no population census considered in this delimitation. We argue that it is impossible at law to do delimitation without knowledge of the population distribution. ZEC, in its delimitation last year, considered only the adult population. By adult population, we are looking at people who are above the age of 18 years. ZEC did not consider people who were 17 last year, who are now 18 this year. And that information is simply not available to us as the contesting parties. We are interested, of course, in the election in 2028. And therefore, as a party that is forward-looking, we are interested in the demographic group that is 13 years old, because those 13-year-olds will be 18 years in 2028. That information will normally be available in a regular delimitation report. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that this delimitation report is going to be alive for 10 years. It is going to govern two elections, the 2023 elections and the 2028 elections. The second issue is that the Constitution makes it very clear that there must be equality of the number of registered voters among constituencies and wards. and that any variation must never exceed 20%. In 119 out of 210 constituencies, that rule, important rule, was violated. And we have constituencies with a variance of 30%, 40%, and the outrageous one with 67%. This is a fundamental issue. And the third issue is the description of the polling stations. The polling stations, contrary to previous years, are not being described by name, but they are being described by codes. It is very easy to manipulate the election because it is incredibly difficult to remember codes. So this is a deliberate act to manipulate this election, but we have seen through it. The fourth is, of course, that the declaration by the president and his proclamation were both illegal. There were two acts that President Mnangagwa did. And the first one was to gazette the delimitation report. And the gazetted report refers to Annexure A, Annexure B, Annexure C. On the gazetted report, however, there is no Annexure A, Annexure B, Annexure C. And that presents a big problem. Why were those annexures hidden from the public? Then the second thing that the president did was to issue a proclamation that this is the delimitation report. In terms of the law, in that proclamation, he must provide the names and the boundaries of wards and constituencies. The proclamation number 1 of 2023 does not provide any name, neither does it provide any boundaries for the constituencies and wards, and that's a fundamental issue. The effect of gazetting, ladies and gentlemen, is to concretize the instrument. It is to give it the face of the law. It is to vaccinate it against any manipulation. So it must provide sufficient information. So if a proclamation does not provide sufficient information, people can always manipulate the information to which it relates. We want to invite you to look at the proclamation issued in 2008 after the delimitation report. And that proclamation in detail tells us what constitutes Highfield East, for example, what constitutes Mbare, and it describes the areas, the borders of that constituency in sufficient detail. But this proclamation number 1 of 2023 does not even give the names of the constituencies, nor does it even give the boundaries of the constituencies, and therefore it is illegal. The MDC will not rest until electoral justice is achieved in Zimbabwe. The government also has not instituted key political, social, and economic reforms, and in particular, it has not implemented those electoral reforms that were suggested by the various observer missions in 2018. These include SADC, EU, AU, Commonwealth, and various UN bodies that were interested in the election. It has not implemented the recommendations of the Moshande Commission. We also think that there are key electoral reforms that must be implemented before this election is held. And one of these key electoral reforms is to reform the bodies, the subcommittees under ZEC. ZEC is a Chapter 12 institution. It is supposed to be independent of political parties, independent of the executive, independent of the ruling party. But unfortunately, the subcommittees under ZEC, including the logistics committee, the accreditation committee, are populated by people from the executive. So you will find people from Foreign Affairs Ministry, from Home Affairs, from Ministry of Justice, and from the President's Office. It cannot be an independent body where the subcommittees under it are dominated by the executive. Ladies and gentlemen, the MDC invites Zimbabwe to understand the consequences of persisting with an unfree and unfair election. There are grave consequences. There is a grave price that Zimbabwe will pay as a nation if we allow an unfree and unfair process. Number one, international isolation will remain. This is because the international isolation of Zimbabwe is indelibly linked to the holding of free and fair elections. If you go to Zidera, one of the conditionalities under Zidera is that the nation must hold truly free and fair elections. If you go to the Commonwealth, Zimbabwe wants to join the Commonwealth, wants to be a member of the Commonwealth. One of the conditions is that you must hold high quality elections, free and fair elections. But also, an election held under these circumstances will generate a disputed result. It will generate national resentment and may generate civil strife. This is a price that Zimbabwe can ill afford. On its part, the MDC resolved yesterday, the National Standing Committee resolved to up our preparations for the elections. Our preparation for elections were actually ongoing, and our candidate selection is actually underway, and we will be presenting our list of candidates in due course. We are fielding all the candidates in all the constituencies and all the wards. We are happy that in the document that we adopted yesterday, the candidate selection document, there is emphasis on the need to come up with specific quota for women and youth. So you are going to see more women candidates in the MDC and more youth candidates in the party. Already the MDC has demonstrated that it is pro-gender. It is gender sensitive. 40% of our presidium are women, and 38% of our national executive are women. We are very close to achieving 50% gender parity. We are very happy that the level of unemployment in Zimbabwe, we are going to be emphasizing on attracting investments from throughout the globe. The MDC believes that Zimbabwe is a friend of the world. We are neither going to look east, nor west, nor north, nor south. Zimbabwe are going to look everywhere. Our government will look everywhere. As the Chinese former president Deng Xiaoping said, we don't care the color of the cat as long as it catches mice. As long as the investment is coming from a legitimate source, we welcome all investment, and we are going to de-racialize investment in Zimbabwe. We also will offer a large subsidies for agricultural inputs. The prices of fertilizer, the prices of chemicals are such that ordinary people cannot afford. We want to subsidize so that we knock down the prices so that our people can afford. Zimbabwe is an agricultural country, and we want to lead the agricultural renaissance. We are also going to offer interest-free loans for small businesses, targeting mainly women and the youth. And these loans will be administered through designated banks and institutions. And the procedures of accessing the loans are going to be made deliberately simple so that our people are able to access these loans so that they participate in business. Our aim in this regard is to revive the economy of the country via the small sector. You may want to know that countries like the United States, Britain, and other Western advanced economies raised their economies on the basis of small businesses, and we are going to follow suit. We have instructed our team led by Dr. Msevenzi and our policy secretary to look at particularly how to tackle corruption. And we have asked them to study the Asian tigers, the Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, on how they specifically dealt with corruption, save, of course, for the death penalty. We are not going to impose a death penalty, but the issues of detection, the issues of deterrent sentences when it comes to issues of corruption. We also offer pension reform. As you know, ladies and gentlemen, our people, our pensioners are living in abject poverty. The pensions are such that people cannot sustain themselves. We are going to revise these, and probably, in all probability, we are going to recalibrate the pensions so that we increase the social protection of our people. We believe, as the MDC, we believe, as the Social Democratic Party, that Zimbabwe can only develop following social democracy. And that is why we have perfected social democracy with its values, the values of freedom, justice, equality, solidarity, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. We hope to avail our policy document soon, as well as our manifesto. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to thank you for coming to this press conference. That ends our presentation to you.
And if anybody's got a question, I'm going to take 3 for the first round, and then 3 for the second round, and 3 for the last round. State your name and the media house you're representing, sir.
My name is Singita Zoya. My question to you is, do you still stand by your statement that you made on Monday that this was a political judgment before the Constitutional Court? Then the second question is that when you filed your application at the Constitutional Court, did you file this MCT or MCN or MCRI? What was the acronym there? Thirdly, you said you are going to participate in elections. Do you foresee yourself winning the elections? Because I don't see you in many constituencies. And we have a case where we understand many of your so-called party members are now defecting to join CC. What is the true status on the ground?
Second one. Okay, my lady.
Thank you. My name is Vitendo Mawere. I just wanted to hear the candidate selection process. How are you doing?
Okay. Third question. 263.
My name is Matilda Mungo from 263 Times. In your address, you said that these coming elections, there will be maybe reading will happen if these issues that you are raising are not addressed. So my question is, if it happens that the High Court will also nullify what you are proposing in your court application, are you going to participate in these 2020 elections, knowing clearly that these elections will be rigged?
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much. First, Chegetai, yes, we persist as the MDC that this was a political judgment. It was a political judgment in the sense that we were treated very differently from other litigants previously who were in the same situation with us. And one such litigant was Jealous Mawarire. Jealous Mawarire, as you know, brought an action in 2013 to force the government then to declare election dates. And he argued that he was a Zimbabwean citizen, he was a registered voter, and he had an interest in the election being held. Fast forward to 2023, I raised the issue that the delimitation report was invalid and would affect our election preparations. I am a Zimbabwean citizen, I am a registered voter, I am a leader of my party, I have presided over a party which has since 1999 participated in the elections. But the judges spend a lot of time questioning my locus standi. And at one time, I actually wanted to stand up in court and say, if I don't have locus standi, tell me what type of Zimbabwean will have locus standi. Jealous Mawarire was allowed to appear before the courts and argue his case. I was called to the court but not allowed to argue my case. The second thing is that the judges specifically allowed our application for direct access. In other words, we knocked to the Supreme Court and they agreed to allow us to argue before them the substantive issues of the case. They were satisfied as regards my locus standi. They were satisfied regarding my cause of action. They even made a remark that the case was strong. But when the day of the court came, we were not allowed to argue on the merits. The judges spent quite a lot of time harassing the lawyers regarding locus standi. At one point in time, they even asked for MDC supporters to be identified, for MDC candidates to be identified, a standard that has not been extended to anybody. So definitely we were treated unfairly. And after what they did, they then, having found that the issue of locus standi was not sustainable, it was not decent to invoke that in this case, they then came and said, well, Mr. Mwonzora, you should choose whether to say the delimitation report is invalid. But if you do that, then end there. Don't say the delimitation report is invalid and as a result of invalidity my rights are affected. Don't say that. Don't talk about your political rights being affected. And that amounted to emasculation. There is no better illustration that this was a political judgment. And there is a written rule in our constitution that when it comes to constitutional matters, the judges must not rely on technicalities. They must go to the substance of the matter. Zimbabweans wanted to know whether their delimitation report was valid or not. That was the fundamental issue. And maybe some people had to be protected, we don't know, but for some strange reason, the judges refused to hear us on the merits. They agreed to hear someone else. Now, what is the difference between Douglas Mwonzora and Jealous Warire? We are both Zimbabweans, we are both registered voters, we are both interested in our country. Jealous Warire was Zanu Pf, I am MDC. So if somebody who is Zanu Pf and another one who is MDC are treated differently, then that's politics. So for the period of the election, Zimbabwe will have two constitutions, all in force, the previous constitution and the current constitution. And that is very undesirable because in a constitution you have related clauses and so on. So you have two constitutions operating at one point in time. Then number 4, in terms of section 1616, I think of the constitution, all delimitations except the first delimitation must consider old boundaries. Stated in other words, in respect to other delimitations, old boundaries are relevant. In respect of the first delimitation, old boundaries are irrelevant. Now, it so happens that the first delimitation is this delimitation. The Constitution says old boundaries are irrelevant. So you can't say in one breath they are irrelevant and then you say we are going to use them. So it doesn't make sense. So going back to 2008 was not an option. Those people who were arguing for 2008, going back to 2008, were actually advocating for a postponement, because assuming that the judges had on the 8th of May said let's go to the 2008 boundaries, the president was duty bound by the constitution to proclaim again, to say Zimbabwe, we are going to go to elections using 2008 boundaries. he was duty bound to give 6 months notice. So 6 months to run from the 8th of May would have pushed the election somewhere close to December. So we are accused of trying to postpone the election. Yet 3 political parties were involved in this election wanted one way or the other a postponement. The Triple C through Jeremiah Bamu wanted 1 month notice postponement. Mnangagwa group would have wanted 6 months, at least 6 months postponement by the very suggestion that we got to 2008. We simply said as the MDC that proclamation must follow a new delimitation. So the 3 people, the 3 political parties were arguing basically the same. And why do you pick on the MDC only? So I think there is a lot of pretense in this country. But of course, going to 2008 is not possible.